So for today's headlines, we're going to see some major contradictions. From President Trump creating a board of peace for Gaza by Christmas, to Putin sending chilling warnings to the West, to NATO scrambling planes above Poland, and to China locking radar on Japanese aircraft, and Israel in the middle of it being isolated. Hey everyone, I'm DinaKalmeta, and today we're going to connect the dots for the push for a peace and the reality of a coming global conflict. Multiple reports now claim that President Trump is preparing to unveil something being called the Board of Peace, a 10-leader governing council that would oversee Gaza. Sources say that this announcement could come before Christmas. And here's what's sending shockwaves. This could line up with prophecy spoken of in the book of Daniel, almost to perfection, but not quite. Prophecy News Watch goes into a little bit more detail about what this could mean. The report reads, there are moments in history when global events suddenly shift from ordinary news to something that feels weightier, something that brushes close to the patterns described in Scripture. And right now, Christians who love Israel are watching a development that is raising eyebrows around the world. President Trump is forming this Board of Peace, made up of 10 international leaders from Arab and Western nations. Leaders who collectively oversee the next phase of governance, security, and reconstruction in Gaza and the broader Middle East peace framework. 10 leaders, 10 seats of authority, 10 influencers shaping a new order over the most prophetically central land on earth. For believers with even a modest understanding of prophecy, that number instantly rings like a bell. Not because this is a fulfillment of Daniel or Revelation, but because it looks uncannily like the architect those books describe in which one day would rise. This is not a moment of fulfillment, but it may be the first time in modern history we've watched the scaffolding take shape. Now, with that question in mind, let's examine what makes this so striking and why we must keep our interpretation grounded. Number 1, the symbolic power of 10 leaders mirrors biblical structure. Daniel 7 and Revelation 17 both describe a last days coalition of 10 rulers who share authority. Never in modern geopolitics have we seen a formal, internationally recognized decision-making body composed of 10 individuals tasked with guiding peace and governance in Israel's vicinity. Even if this is not the moment, the formation of a 10-member peace authority is undeniably reminiscent of those prophecies. Number 2, a multinational governing body over Israel's security. Prophecy reveals a future world where Israel's peace is shaped, not internally, but externally, by international forces who exert oversight and pressure. The Board of Peace is the first real-world example of a multinational authority claiming stewardship over Israel's peace negotiations, something that would have been unthinkable decades ago. It normalizes what Scripture says will eventually happen. Number 3, Revelation describes 10 kings who give their power into a collective structure. While today's leaders are not doing so in a prophetic sense, the mechanism is similar. Nations voluntarily surrendering decision-making power to a centralized, unified board. In this case, Arab nations and Western powers are agreeing to collectively oversight over Gaza, bypassing Palestinian voters entirely. That shift towards centralized international power strongly mirrors the kind of systems envisioned in biblical end times governance. Prophecy students have long said that the world will see power struggles, alliances, and institutions constructed before the Antichrist rises to lead them. In other words, this system comes before the figure, and we may be witnessing the earliest version of a system that future leaders, prophetic or not, could eventually expand. This is not a fulfillment, but it may be preparation. So what are the missing pieces and setbacks? Well, number 1, this structure could change, and it is fragile. Despite news sources claiming 10 leaders from Arab and Western nations are to be appointed to this board, until an official announcement is made, it could change. It could be 9. It could be 11. The principle behind it stays the same, but without the actual number of 10, it does lose some prophetic impact. The committee could still collapse within months, and there is no guarantee it'll last. In fact, its purpose is to be transitional, so even though this process will likely take years, there is no guarantee it will still be functional in its proposed form. Number 2, there is no Antichrist figure, no central ruler, no global allegiance. Prophecy requires a dominant leader rising out of the 10. This is a board, not a throne. Trump may be the head of the board, but for the time being, his time is limited by both politics and age. Despite the board working together on Middle East peace, there may not be much else they agree on in global politics. A strong leader who will control them has yet to appear. A 7-year treaty is nowhere in sight. Daniel's prophecy hinges on a very specific covenant of 7 years. No such treaty has been proposed or discussed. The peace structure is managerial, not a covenant. However, this could easily change as the board looks for solutions and timeframes. So keep an eye out for specific timeframe proposals and 7-year periods once this board starts to make decisions in 2026. Now, of course, I'm going to go back to the Abraham Accords. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I believe that the Abraham Accords is a template for that 7-year covenant in which it can be changed. But as of right now, there is no 7-year peace agreement. But let's move along. Prophecy News Watch gives us more reasons why we're missing pieces and setback. Prophetic pillars are absent. No rebuilt temple, no global religious authority, no mark or economic control, no world leader claiming divine authority, no global enforcement. Without these, we are looking at a foreshadowing, not a fulfillment. So are we ready for what comes next? Well, this may not be prophecy fulfilled, but it may be prophecy rehearsed. The framework, the concept, and the pattern. For the first time, they're beginning to look startlingly familiar. A 10-leader coalition shaping peace in Israel is something no student from Scripture can ignore. It is not the final structure, but it may be the early outline. The faint pencil sketch before the ink goes on the page. For Christians, this is a moment to watch with wisdom. For non-believers, it is a moment to consider whether prophecy is no longer ancient, but unfolding. So this article right here pretty much lays it down as to what we're seeing right now and what is still missing. And I'm going to leave a link to it below this video so that you guys can check it out. But definitely very interesting. Now, I would like to move along and talk about this boycott of Israel. While this peace is being brokered from the top down, the nations of the world are turning their back on Israel with unprecedented speed. Just look at Europe, Spain, Ireland, Slovenia, the Netherlands. They're all now boycotting Eurovision simply because of Israel's participation. You might say, Dina, this is just a song contest, but it is symbolic of a much deeper rot. The Telegraph just published a list of all the ways Israel is being canceled. From diplomatic channels to cultural events, the Jewish state is being isolated. Israel has been canceled by individuals and organizations in almost every area of public life since October 7th. What about academia? The BDS campaign against Israel has been going strong for more than 20 years in academia, led by the University and College Union, which represents lecturers. But it took a new momentum after the Israeli-Gaza war started in 2023. In general, the attempted boycotts have not worked in the UK, but in Europe, it is a different story. Universities in Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain have increasingly voted to suspend agreements with Israeli institutions. Sport. The contentious decision to ban Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from attending its match against Aston Villa last month was partly down to an organization called Game Over Israel, which has been campaigning to ban Israel. In retail, there has been a concerted effort to boycott any goods that have an association with Israel. And in politics, Britain and other countries have shown their disapproval. Labour has indicated that it would adhere to the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court for Netanyahu and his former Minister of Defense, Gallant. Meanwhile, on the international stage, the UK has been among the countries to recognize a Palestinian state, doing irreparable harm to relations with Israel. And UN delegates staged a mass walkout when Netanyahu addressed the UN in September. Military. The BDS movement in particular has pushed for big funds, such as pension and council savings, to divest from Israeli military firms, and has had some success. Spain initiated a ban on arms exports to the Jewish state on October 7th, 2023, but it goes on to state that other European countries to impose complete bans on the export and import of arms and military equipment to Israel include Slovenia, Belgium, and Norway. although the EU still works with Israel. In January this year, a collection of 12 countries from the Global South formed to coordinate legal, diplomatic, and economic measures against Israel, including a comprehensive arms embargo. The 12 countries which have signed up to these measures are Bolivia, Colombia, Cuba, Indonesia, Iraq, Libya, Malaysia, Namibia, Nicaragua, Oman, St. Vincent, Grenadines, and South Africa. Several Western countries, including the UK, has imposed partial arms embargoes. Others to have imposed partial bans include Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, and under Biden, even the US. Several countries have prevented Israeli companies from exhibiting arms at fairs, including the French government. In September this year, the UK government barred an official Israeli government delegation from attending the Defense and Security Equipment International Fair in London. Meanwhile, Britain has banned Israelis from taking courses at the prestigious Royal College of Defense Studies. Culture and arts. Writers, celebrities, and artists have been at pains to demonstrate their virtue for canceling Israel and increasingly Jews. This has happened in the worlds of music, theater, film, art, and publishing, with numerous examples in 2025 alone. Now, with that said, it's being reported that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to meet with President Trump on December 29, according to the government spokesman. The meeting is expected to take place as part of a diplomatic framework that has been taking shape in recent days ahead of the Prime Minister's visit to the U.S. Here we see them rushing to create a board of peace in the Middle East. But we have to ask the question, what kind of peace can exist if the very nation that they're trying to make peace with, they're isolating, meaning Israel? The Bible tells us. In Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3, God said that all nations would turn against Israel, that he would make Jerusalem a burdensome stone. And that is exactly what we are seeing right now. We are literally watching prophecy being played out right before our very eyes. But I would like to switch gears and talk about what is going on between China and Japan. Express News is reporting that fears of a new conflict have flared once again, after China was accused of an extremely regrettable and dangerous act. Japan and Australia have demanded strict preventive measures after Chinese military aircraft reportedly locked radar onto Japanese fighter jets. Japan's defense ministry said a Chinese J-15 fighter jet launched from the aircraft carrier Liaoning on Saturday intermittently targeted Japanese F-15s with its radar on two separate occasions. Once for about 3 minutes in the late afternoon and again for roughly 30 minutes in the evening. Japan's defense minister said that Japan formally protested the alleged incident, calling it an extremely regrettable act and dangerous one that exceeded the scope necessary for safe aircraft operations. Now, the senior colonel spokesman for the Chinese Navy dismissed Japan's claims and said China will take necessary measures to resolutely safeguard its security and legitimate rights and interests. He said that we asked the Japanese side to immediately stop slandering and smearing and strictly restrain its frontline actions. The Australian defense minister called the alleged incident deeply concerning, saying that we are deeply concerned by the actions in China in the last 24 hours. We expect those interactions to be safe and professional. In the meantime, it's not just China and Japan that's seeing tensions. Thailand says its fighter jets struck Cambodia in an attempt to cripple its military capability as a re-eruption of border hostilities that derailed a fragile ceasefire brokered by President Trump. Each side blames the other for starting the clashes that broke out overnight and intensified before dawn and spread to several locations. Cambodia accuses Thailand of inhumane and brutal acts of aggression, stressing that it has not retaliated, while Bangkok said it carried out airstrikes on military targets after its neighbor mobilized heavy weaponry and repositioned combat units. The fighting was the fiercest since a 5-day exchange of rockets and heavy artillery in July that marked their heaviest clashes in recent history. During that time, President Trump intervened to broker a ceasefire. And what is going on with the United States and Venezuela? Well, according to the Daily Mail, President Trump did not rule out expanding U.S. military operations beyond Venezuela to Mexico and Colombia. The president said in an interview taped this week that he would consider using military force on 2 allies in Latin America. Now, of course, for obvious reasons that I can't say here on YouTube, the same reason that Trump is going after Venezuela is the same reason that he alluded to Mexico and and Colombia. Trump was asked by Politico if he would consider using force against targets in other Latin American countries within the highly illegal trades, and he said, sure, I would. A substantial U.S. military force consisting of naval warships and special ground forces has been deployed to the Caribbean, as I reported, to pressure Maduro's regime in Venezuela. The president said, I don't want to rule in or out. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk to you about military strategy. Now, what's going on with Russia? Well, Putin has boasted that Russia will take territory from Ukraine either one way or another, which many are seeing as a warning to the West that could spark a much bigger conflict. Speaking during a very cozy visit to India to see the Prime Minister, the Russian leader was asked about his thoughts on the future of the Donbass region in Ukraine, in which President Putin stated that there were only two ways the territory would end up, and both of them involved Russia being in control. And it doesn't end there. NATO fighter jets were scrambled and air defense systems were put on alert in Poland in response to Russia's latest drone and missile strikes in Ukraine. The command said in a post on X, fighter jets have been scrambled and ground-based air defense systems as well as radar reconnaissance systems have reached a state of readiness. These actions are of a preventive nature and are aimed at securing the airspace and its protection, especially in areas adjacent to the threatened regions. Now, this was reported by ABC News on December 6th, so just 3 days ago. Fox News is reporting that the German Chancellor and the European Commission President are in talks with a reluctant Belgium over what to do with billions of dollars in frozen Russian assets held in the country. According to the Belgian government, approximately 224 billion of sanctioned Russian assets are held in Euroclear, a Brussels-based financial institution. The European Commission wants to seize these assets and transfer them to Ukraine as part of a $190 billion financial package for Ukraine to help pay its bills and fund the conflict further. Prime Minister Bart D. Weaver is concerned that taking Russia's assets could be interpreted as an act of war by Russia and provoke the Russian president to retaliate against Belgium. Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy head of the country's Security Council, even threatened Brussels and its European allies in an inflammatory post on X. He posted, if the crazy EU does steal frozen Russian assets for a reparations loan, we may view it as a casus belli with all relevant implications for Brussels and company. EU leaders are up against a tight clock as Ukraine is projected to run out of funds for the war in April, and EU leaders will convene on December 18th to make a final decision on how to support Ukraine's budgetary needs for the next 2 years. Key European leaders have traveled back and forth to Belgium to convince the government to sign on the proposal. The plan has widespread support within the European Union, but Belgium's prime minister has so far stood in the way. We are told in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke that we would hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation would rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. We're watching that right now. We're also told that Jerusalem would become a burdensome stone. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3, that the entire world would gather against her. And that's in the progress of happening right now. We're also told that hearts would grow wax cold because iniquity would increase. Earthquakes in diverse places, volcanic eruption, chaotic weather, distress of nations, all of which is happening right now. We are truly living in biblical times. But I'd love to hear from you guys. Tell me what you think in the comments. Also, when you have some time, come and visit me on my social media pages, as well as my website at www.cww7news.com. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, God bless and stay safe.